Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of our VMware Cloud on AWS webinar series. We hope that you watched the first one in the series, delivered by Rackspace CTO Lee James and Tim Hearn by VMware, called Introduction to VMware Cloud on AWS on the 7th of October. If you didn't get a chance, have a look at it later, not now. It's just 52 minutes, and for reference, I've added the link of that presentation to the description for this webinar too, so you can go and reference that. Today, we'll take that introduction a bit further and talk about some of the technical considerations that one should keep in mind when designing for a VMware Cloud on AWS deployment, and some of the popular use cases that we at Rackspace are seeing recently that are gaining popularity amongst our customers. My name is Athar Beg, and I work as an enterprise solutions architect at Rackspace. I work with our enterprise customer user base and provide them with solutions that cover the entire portfolio of products that Rackspace has to offer. I've loved VMware and its products right from the start and started working with them right back when VMware itself started. In recent years, I've specialized in AWS side of things, so I hold advanced certifications for both VMware and AWS. So you can imagine why VMware Cloud on AWS is my favorite topic, and I'm hoping that my enthusiasm for it will come across in this presentation as well. I'm quite involved in the community as well. So I've been a vExpert for many years. I also have a blog and do a bit of podcasting as well. The easiest way to find me is on Twitter, and the handle is quite simply my name. But also feel free to drop me a mail if you want to get in contact. My partner in crime today is Carmen. So Carmen, why don't you tell everyone about yourself?
Hi. Hello, everyone. My name is Carmen Hostetler, and I work as a cloud solutions architect at VMware. I work with our service providers partners to provide our customers with the best solutions that VMware has to offer. I have been in the industry for over 15 years, and I'm based in the UK. I have worked in several industries such as manufacturing, government, banking, and I have had several roles throughout these years. In the last years, I have worked as an infrastructure architect and cloud solutions architect. I do have a certification from VMware and Data Center Certified, Virtualization Certified. So let's just get started. And just to give you an idea of today's proceedings, Arthur will start by giving you a brief overview of Rackspace and their own-based expertise. Following from that, we'll go into some of the technical considerations that you should be thinking about before starting any VMware Cloud on AWS deployments. After that, Arthur will carry on giving a high-level overview of what steps are involved in setting up a VMware Cloud on AWS environments, and some of the options that you will have to choose between when going through the deployment. After that, then we'll talk about some of the tips that we have picked up during our deployments. I will make your deployment, we hope, easier and successful. After also, we'll have some popular use cases for you that Rackspace is seeing with their customer base, and then some of the application integration use cases that I know is in his favorite topic. So let's just get started now, and then over to you, Arthur, for now. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Carmen. So for the people on this call who may not have known Rackspace from the past, Rackspace is an industry-leading technology services company with incredible breadth and depth of expertise. We've been in a private cloud business for many years, but also partner with all the major public cloud providers. We also provide security and application services, and even professional services for all of our products to our customers too. So now you can see our emphasis on being unbiased. That's because we have over 3,500 certifications. But more important to note is that they are all for various cloud platforms. We have those people, certified people, but also 20 years worth of operational excellence, which really puts us in a unique position to serve our customers very well. This is also why we are trusted by the majority of the Fortune 500 companies and have customers in over 20 countries. And that's a number we are quite proud of. We also hire the best talent, and they join us for a very long time. As you can see on the slide, I mean, we've been on the Sunday Times list of 100 best companies to work for 8 times in the last 11 years. We've also won similar awards with other publications as well. And to all of you on this webinar, we've always looked on the lookout for great talent. So whenever you see a position on our website or interested in joining us anyway, don't hesitate. I'm sure Rackspace will be the best place that you want to work with at. I guess that's enough as an introduction to Rackspace, but do check our website or contact me if you want to know more. But now, without further ado, let's move on to the technical consideration piece of this presentation. So as Carmen mentioned in the beginning, good preparation before starting on a VMware Cloud on AWS deployment goes a long way in ensuring a smooth deployment. And I guess it's like the case for anything. I mean, the more preparation you put into a task, the fewer issues are encountered when you're actually doing it. So Carmen and I were discussing this earlier and came up with a few things that would be good ones to think about when starting. And the first one that came to my mind was the kind of workloads that are actually good candidates for migration. One might argue that this is not too different from other migrations, right? I mean, of course, but I'm actually talking about workloads that will not be suitable for migration to VMware Cloud on AWS. For example, if you have a requirement to work with appliances, they might require very specific networking or platform version. We know that currently VMware Cloud on AWS does not allow deep networking access to customers, and there's certainly no capability for anyone to get root access or install additional WIBs, for example. So if there's a chance that you have such workloads in your environment, you may need to think about some other way to deal with such workloads. Sometimes it's just easier to just ask the supplier. They might have a newer version that you might want to upgrade or move to. Now, I don't want to worry you pretty much, as pretty much anything that you can currently run on your on-premises environment should work on VMware Cloud or AWS as well, as long as you're at a supported version. But it's important to do the due diligence to determine if there are any oddball machines that might prove challenging to migrate. Carmen, you wanted to talk about hypervisor or VMware hardware versions, right?
Indeed. ACS is also known as Hybrid Connect, and it's quite an exceptional piece of software. If you don't know it, it takes most of the complexities of migration workloads from on-prem cloud environments to VMware Cloud and AWS, and you can even go back. So you do not need to return them to the original environment, and this is a great functionality for work mobility. But all magic has some limits, as you know, and while XGS can deal with pretty old versions and is transparent converting the VMs during the migration, the South vSphere versions need to be version 5 or higher. Or if you want to demotion machines, i.e. downtime is not desirable, then it needs to be version 5.5 or higher. Also, for that reason, if there are machines in your environment that have hardware versions lower than 9, that might also be a problem. So that could be the case for third-party appliances, and sometimes they are not updated as much as regular machines. So because of the platform dependencies that you were talking about earlier. Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, the next one that comes to mind is connectivity decisions. IPsec VPNs are great for quick connectivity. It's quite simple as well. But some large companies require stronger links with low latency, for example, Direct Connect, or in our case, Rack Connect Global. It could be due to a lot of estimated traffic that you might have. Sometimes it's just because of company policies that might dictate use of a private link for compliance, for example. So that sort of connectivity can take weeks, if not months, because there are various factors like multiple providers trying to they work serially typically, and quite difficult to get through all of them in a sequence. So it takes a while. So I mean, the sooner you start on that and decide on that, that's better. The good thing is that if you already have an AWS environment with Direct Connect, you don't necessarily need to get a second one. If there's enough bandwidth available on your existing link, then another private WIF can be created and that can be used. Another good point to think about is layer 2 versus layer 3 connectivity. So unless there's a good reason, I'd say go for layer 2, as it makes life so much simpler and is the preferred approach for DR or cloud bursting scenarios. But then you should also have a low latency link, a link that can transfer at about 100 megabits to start with and higher, something like that. And then there's a bit about security policies. If we consider that we may end up with 3 joint platforms like on-premises, VMware Cloud on AWS, and then AWS native environment itself, there are various places where there are effective checkpoints where the security policies or rules have to be configured to control traffic between environments. So start thinking about those north-south or east-west security policies early, as they are quite quick and to create once you've deployed the environment. So
thank you for that, Arthur. So now let's talk a bit about the instance types that we offer. There are 2 different host types that they can be used with VMware Cloud and AWS, and these are the i3 and the R5, and they are bare metal hosts manufactured by Amazon. The i3 metal host continues in this role as the main workhorse of the service. It's offering a balance of CPU, memory, and storage, and the i3 instance is ideal for most workloads, but particularly anything that requires higher performance or lower latency. As an example, for OLTP databases or high-speed analysis, things like that. And on the other hand, the R5 metal instance is based on what we call the elastic vSAN. And these are ideal for any capacity-bound workloads. Performance is going to be lower, is consistent, and suitable for any application, but only cost-effective with the large data sets. So initially, elastic vSAN is aimed at workloads with large capacity and moderate performance requirements. And we are talking about like data warehousing batches or batch processing and disaster recovery. So if we talk about how the clusters can be mixed, so with stretch clusters, you can have multiple R5 stretch clusters per SDDC, or you can have multiple i3 stretch clusters per SDDC. Then you can also have mixed i3 and R5 stretch clusters, but you cannot mix the stretch clusters and non-stretch clusters in the same SDDC. I'll repeat that. You cannot mix stretch and non-stretch clusters in the same SDDC. And with the non-stretch clusters, you can mix i3s and R5 clusters. Another thing to take into consideration is that there is no migration from one single availability zone to a multi-availability zone. For this, we will need to create a new SDDC. Thank you.
Right. So lastly, even if the VMware Cloud environments are not in place yet, planning relating to the integration with AWS can really start now in advance. So you could plan if certain applications will be a straight lift and shift to be refactored later, or if there are any benefits in doing some partial refactoring to start with. For example, one could front end the web service sitting in VMware Cloud and AWS environment with application load balancers in AWS, or even the application servers. One could also have a multi availability zone deployment of the database at the back end. They are quite straightforward changes to make. So there's some benefit in deciding if that can be done as part of the migration. In fact, the scenario I've just mentioned is not only quite easy to do, but also reversible, as that would be additional. So if something goes wrong and you want to switch back, it should be quite easy to do. Now, I've spoken to some of my clients who already know about VMware Cloud on AWS in general, especially after Tim's brilliant presentation. But now they want to know at a higher level, what are the steps to have an environment up and running? But enough to see, not too detailed, but what are the steps? How do you go about making such an environment? So the idea behind what's to come in the following slide is not too much detail, but enough to know or see a picture of what's involved. However, before I do that, I'd like to say that do let us know via feedback or mail if you would like to have a deep dive webinar focusing on particular topics that we are discussing today. For example, it's not a big enough presentation to deep dive on networking or sizing principles or even application integration. So we can absolutely do that session for you later as well. So that shouldn't be a problem. Just let us know if you want any of focused deep dive sessions on them. Also, I'll be talking a lot from here on, as I wasn't already. So feel free to type your questions in the chat box, and Carmen will keep answering them as they come in. But if there are any left, we'll pick them up towards the end and answer them in the time reserved for the Q&A. So let's start from the top. You may have your own environment on premises, or if you're hosted by us at Rackspace, you might have one with us. So if you've already thought about the things Carmen and I were discussing earlier, you can go ahead into the VMware Cloud on AWS portal, answer a few questions, and have an SDDC deployed for you. So first, you select a region, and then you would like to, you can select a single or multiple host deployments. You can even tick a box and have a stretch cluster deployed for you automatically. That is if the box is available to be ticked. And I say that because options that come next change depending on what you've chosen previously. Also, like Carmen was mentioning, that you can select i3 or i5, R5 metal instances. That also then determines how much storage you have. If you've selected i3, storage will be predetermined for you based on the number of hosts. But if you've selected R5, you get to choose how much you need. It starts from 15 terabytes up to 35 terabytes in 5 terabyte increments. The interface is quite intuitive and straightforward, really. So, that's pretty much your vSphere side of choice is done. And then you supply the details of the account number that you would like this environment to connect to. So having an AWS environment is a prerequisite for creating a VMware Cloud and AWS environment. You can create it before you start or use one that you may already have. But if we are creating this environment for you, we'll liaise with you on the details and assist you in the creation of it. You can then select the VPC and the subnet you want to associate your VMware Cloud and AWS environment with. And that is used to create the routing configuration for the Elastic Network interfaces that allow you to natively access the AWS environment. You can see just one here, but that's, of course, a logical representation of the 17 that gets created. It's not a very well-known fact, by the way, but there is a maximum of 16 hosts in a cluster, so you can pretty much guess the additional one is used to replace a host, or when they're getting patched or one gets failed, something like that. Connecting to the AWS account also allows AWS services billing to be charged to the account. For example, your data going to S3, CloudTrail charges, or RDS if you choose to use that. But that's basically it. Not a lot of choices to make. Once you click Deploy SDDC, it all gets deployed. Typically, it takes just over an hour, but I'd say allow 2. From then on, you can add hosts within minutes if required. You may wish to also create VPC endpoints to get direct access to an AWS service that would normally be public. For example, VPC endpoints for S3 are pretty popular and allow your data to go to the S3 bucket via the AWS backbone, which is comparatively faster and secure. I got my animation wrong, by the way. So VPNs appeared first, but of course, when deployed initially, the SDDC is not connected to your on-premises environment. So either you utilize the direct connect options or RAG connect or create IPsec tunnels based on whatever you decided in the considerations. I mean, generally, IPv6 tunnels come first because they're quick to deploy, create. You can have multiple of them if you have the bandwidth. The main decisions there are if you're going to have a policy or a route-based. Typically, post-policy route-based is the default. That's also preferred because if you're going for a redundant setup, then route-based actually is a requirement. As you can see, the creation of the SSDC is quite quick, but some thinking and planning is required beforehand. So the whole deployment goes smoothly, and that's why we are mentioning all of these points, the considerations that you were talking about earlier. So there are some tips and gotchas as well that we came across, which we would like to tell you about, and can also make your deployment a bit smoother. So, Carmen, you were going to talk about the Elastic DRS side of it?
Yes, thank you. So Elastic DRS is a feature which enables an SDDC to scale based on its resource utilization. So when utilization remains consistently and above any of the scale-out thresholds, then the SDDC will automatically add a host. And on the other hand, when utilization is consistently below any of the scale-in thresholds, then the SDDC will automatically remove a host. Elastic DRS is configured on a per SDDC basis, and it comes in two different flavors, if you like. One is optimized for cost, and the other is optimized for performance. And the difference between the two variants has to do with how aggressively a scale-in or scale-out action is going to happen. When optimized for cost, the SDDC will be more conservative when scaling out, but more eager to scale in. And when optimized for performance, the opposite is going to happen. It should be noted that VMware will automatically add hosts to the SDDC when the storage utilization crosses the 70% threshold, even when Elastic DRS is disabled. And this is because this practice is a preventative measure designed to ensure that vSAN has a minimal amount of slack or free space, if you like, that is available to it at all times. And this is because this space is needed as an example for like storage policies and things like that. Thank you, Arthur.
Right. So if your cluster was to grow to 6 or more hosts, one had to manually change the storage settings to RAID 6 erasure coding. And not many people know this, but this is actually stipulated by VMware to maintain SLA requirements. But I'd say had to, because VMware announced at VMworld that in upcoming versions, VMware will have that policy change taken care of automatically. So, but like everything else, it will take some time to have it roll out. So it still pays to bear that gotcha in mind. So that's something to be aware of. So I guess, Carmen, are you talking about, I mean, do you want to talk about
Okay, let me say this one. Okay, yes. So I was on mute, sorry. VMware Cloud VMware Cloud on AWS allows you to create a cluster with only 3 hosts. And this is because in case of failure, any replacement is automatic and pretty quick, so that the risk of having 2 failures at the same time or before the first one fail is replaced and is very low. However, that also has an impact on effective storage space. And thinking the difference between a RAID 5 and a RAID 1 in terms of storage capacity. So we know the RAID 5 is more storage efficient, and it's no different in case of a VMware Cloud and AWS cluster. So by default, a 4-host cluster gets a RAID 5 configuration, which results in a more efficient storage configuration, whereas a 3-host deployment in RAID 1 by default, and therefore the effective capacity is much lower per host. So I would say that it's possible to go for a 4-host configuration, not only to have more resilience, but also a more efficient storage configuration and consumption. But do bear in mind, however, that once you have deployed using the configuration with 4 hosts, it will have the RAID 5 set by default, and you won't be able to go back down to a 3 host. And this is due to the fact that the storage policy, if you don't need to go down to a 3 host, it will be a new deployment, and the workloads will be transferred to the new one, and the original deployment will be destroyed afterwards. Because once you go to a RAID 5 with 4 hosts, and then to go back to a 3 node, that will move your RAID to a RAID 1. So no one should also bear in mind that we also need to talk about the CIDRs and the networking. So I think after you will be talk about that for now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, it's like everything else in AWS that it's always best to not have overlapping CIDRs. But the fact that the 10.0.0.0/15 and 172.31.0.0/16, they're reserved and must not be used for either management or compute networks. So that is important, because when this is asked, when you're deploying the SDDC, that question is asked, and it can't be changed later, so choose wisely. And like I said, in AWS, it's quite important that certain CIDRs are not overlapping, but the management world CIDR is either /16, /21, or 23. I mean, the last one obviously is not that big, so I'd say go for /16 or /21. But given that today the maximum number of hosts is 300, /21 seems big enough. But the main thing is to actually accommodate everything that typically goes into the management network. So not only the hosts, but also say HCX or whatever appliance it may have, or site recovery, or basically whatever you're going to put into the management network, so it all fit within that network. So having it a big enough size will help you not having to change it later or deploy another one. So
correct. Yes. So when you add new appliances, there is extra resources that are being added to the cluster. So as an example, here we have chosen HCX. When you deploy HCX, the VMware HCX platform is deployed with technologies and the capabilities that has the following 4 components. And then, so we have the HCX Enterprise Management Appliance, and this provides a framework for deployment the HCX services appliances later on, and integrates with vCenter and with the existing, leverage the existing SSO for authentication. So that's one. Then it also has the HCX One Interconnect appliance, and this one provides the migration and cross-cloud vMotion capabilities over the internet or even private lines. So the HCX One Interconnect appliance also provides the Swift 3 encryption for the traffic engineering and workload mobility. The HCX One Optimization appliance improves performance and characteristics of the internet or private lines, and it leverages data, the duplication, and line conditioning. So for performance, that is closer to a LAN environment. And the last one is the HCX Network Extension appliance. And this provides a high performance level 2 extension capability, and this is capable of 4 to 6 gigabits of throughput per VLAN. And this also can be scaled out to accommodate the extension of additional VLANs. So once we take into account all these appliances, these are resources and overhead that would be deployed in our cluster. And these are on top of the ones we already deploy as part of the management resources. So we need to take into account appliances and services that are being installed because they also consume resources. Thank you.
Right. So the last one I have it in mind was the availability of a particular instance type in a region. Now, this shouldn't happen very often, but when an availability zone becomes available, not all instance types are instantly there. So while i3 metal is the main workhorse and available pretty much right from the start, you may find that R5 metal isn't when you're designing an environment. I have that one, so I just thought that I should plug that one in. A similar thing can happen for new regions. So if there are less than 3 availability zones, because a stretch cluster deployment requires minimum of 3 availability zones. So when you're thinking about deploying an environment, also start looking for availability of instance types that you're going to need for your deployment. So now you might be thinking, Arthur, you are actually, what are you actually seeing with your customers that they're actively asking for? Well, I'm glad you asked. So the first category I would like to mention is burstable compute. There are 2 main cases where customers find VMware Cloud on AWS environment very useful. One is due to some seasonal activity or quarter or year end. Customer wants an environment where they can expand their compute for a short amount of time and shrink back down when the activity has passed. That way they don't have to keep their capital locked constantly and pay as you go. That works out quite a lot cheaper. And because of the short lifespan of those hosts and being up to date, operations are much happier as well. And you want to keep them happy, right? Another is when customer wants a DR environment, but they don't have a huge environment for it. So think about it. Say you have a 16-host environment that you want to protect. Typically, you would like to have a separate DC with at least 8 to 10 hosts to have a proper DR environment to fail over to. You would also need to invest and lock capital permanently for the possibility of needing it one day. So what if you can have that insurance and don't have to pay as much? With VMware Cloud on AWS, you can have your cake and eat it. You can have a minimal pilot light environment running there, say with site recovery, and have elastic DRS switched on. All you need then is have all your storage VM replicated or VM storage replicated. In case the 3 hosts won't have enough storage, at Rackspace, we'll imminently have an exclusive, well, we have a partnership with NetApp anyway, but an exclusive service for you shortly, where we can make their storage available at high speed to your VMware Cloud on AWS environment. And once you have that in a DR scenario, it will automatically expand on demand your VMware Cloud environment. And once the failback happens, it shrinks back down. So you don't need to have all those similar number of hosts running all the time. On top of that, you can have as many sites DRing, fanning into the same DR setup, which can save even more. So that's another environment. So then the next one is when a company, their contract or lease for a DC is running, and they want to quickly exit a DC. Migrating out of a DC typically requires conversion if you're going to some other cloud. In this case, with the help of HGX that Carmen was talking about earlier, a company can quite quickly migrate out of that DC without much conversion to their VMware estate. Sure, there'll be some other infrastructure that will require some thought, but between VMware infrastructure and AWS, most scenarios or services are covered. And you're guaranteed to have the VMware side at least running seamlessly, so you can then focus on all the rest of the stuff that will need migrating. Then there's my favorite topic of all, application integration with AWS. So I'm going to go through some examples that I can show you very quickly. I'm conscious of the time as well, so I won't go into too much detail, but we can discuss more later or even have another webinar if you like to go into deeper dive into such topics I was mentioning earlier. So the first one I can talk about is Active Directory integration. So in this environment, the setup is typically the same as before. So the same steps you go through, but then you create new instances in your VMware Cloud and AWS environment. You open relevant ports and have your on-premises DCs replicating all the way to your DCs in VMware Cloud or AWS. Then they get all the directory services over there. And then you also have the AD connectors in AWS environment. If you want to then get authenticated but not replicate all the DC of your domain services over there, then you can use AD connectors to connect into that environment. It's all high speed because they are connected via the 25 gigabits per second ENI. So it's pretty much line speed, same availability zone. And also, if then your AWS environment can piggyback on the same on-premises directory services to get authenticated. And even, if there is role-based access control running, then depending on whichever role they're trying to switch to, then that also gets authenticated. So it's all gels and links in very nicely together. The next one is file service integration, because that's also a popular use case where you can make use of the Amazon File Services for Windows service with a managed service by AWS. So you can even have it resilient based on 2 availability zones, having replicating DFS via DFS between the 2. It also links into either the directory services within AWS, or you can link it to the same one as you had before in your VMware Cloud on AWS. This share can then be accessed by either the VMware Cloud environment on the on-premises. It gets snapshotted automatically, goes to the S3 bucket. You can even create your own schedules to get it snapshotted. So again, another instance where you can make use of redundant services in AWS to provide services to your VMware estate. And finally, the one that I was talking about earlier about application load balancers as well, that you could, that in NSX, for example, AVI networks are coming and they'll provide load balancing, but there isn't a very good solution at this point, or any solution for load balancing in VMware Cloud and AWS. I mean, surely you can put F5 appliances there as well, but as you know, it's quite why create all that complexity if you have a simpler solution. So in AWS, your users can come through Route 53, hit your CloudFront environment. You can even have Certificate Manager, Shield taking care of, or WAFs taking care of the DDoS and all that kind of protection environment. Your traffic will hit the web application load balancers, but then on the back end, have the web service sitting in the VMware Cloud on AWS environment. Same with the application service. The access group has that. And then on the back end, you can have a redundant RDS-based multi-availability zone setup. So your data is important. Obviously, it gets saved like that. Obviously, there's no reason why the rest of them can also be in AWS or vice versa. It's just that I'm trying to show here that it's an easy environment to set up. It's not really that complex, and it's a good use case for having your application integration going between the 2 environments. Now, I have a very specific use case also to show you for a particular customer of ours. I'm a primary SA for Metro Bank as well, and they have an environment hosted with us. We take care of one of their all of their environment, but this particular environment is a development one where they needed something. It comprises of an Oracle bare metal instance or instances, and then it connects to a data platform for some data, and a lot of virtual machines access them. Now, the number of those virtual machines can change all the time and can expand or shrink. So while I could have put that all into VMware Cloud on AWS, you know where this is going, right? I mean, I created an application integrated environment, which looks not as complex as the ones that you're just seeing, but it doesn't have to be complex. I thought that the bare metal instance would look better In the AWS side of things, also the data platform has a custom AMI that can be scaled up and down, and the storage can be dynamically changed. So that goes into the same availability zone on the AWS side, but the workloads accessing that environment are now sitting in the VMware Cloud on AWS environment. The environment shrinks and expands as required. Then obviously the cost of the environment is much more in control as compared to if you were to have all of that environment sitting in your on-premises environment, consuming all that resource, because you obviously have to scale all the way up, or for the worst case scenario, you have to plan for that. In this case, they're able to modulate their use as required. So, I talked a lot, and I guess it's time to ask any questions for everyone on the webinar, or if there are any in the chat box. Do we have any questions?
There are no questions in the chat box.
Right. Okay. I mean, I guess that's my opportunity to, answer one of the things that I actually was asked even yesterday. So someone asked me that should we go for stretch clusters in VMware Cloud on AWS? So I said that, if you are running production workloads there, and if the budget allows, then absolutely. This is quite common when it comes to an on-premises environment, right? Companies do have to consider the risk of downtime if a DC goes down for whatever reason. So at the end of the day, availability zones are also DCs, and they can also go down. And we've heard sometimes, an availability zone going down. So the same principle applies to them too. So if you enable it, it's all synchronously replicated and protected by HA. So if an availability zone goes pop, HA will bring those machines up in the other availability zone pretty much in the same way as your on-premises deployment would. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to put all your workloads in that environment, only the critical ones that you normally do in your on-premises as well. So if you have enough workloads that justify continuous uptime and can, fit on those resources, then I think it's a no-brainer. On that, I would also say that one does have to remember, though, that there are quite minimal but data transfer charges because it's between two availability zones. It's often forgotten that now it builds up quickly, slowly, whereas I think it's 1 cent per GB. So whatever replication traffic will be between your two environments will be costing something. So something to keep in mind for people if they happen to put that in place. But it's, I think, invaluable to have that capability because when this came about, one of our customers very early was asking for it. And then we couldn't give it to them in the very, very early days, but now we can. So that's very good. So still no questions. So I guess, do you have anything else that you would like to add, Carmen, at this point?
No, there are no more questions in here. Yes, so I just wanted to add to what you were saying that with regards to whether we start with 3 hosts or 5 hosts or stretch clusters and that's the beauty of the service and the functionality that you can potentially just start with the 3 hosts and with the scalability automated as your workloads grow or increase. You can configure this, like we said, based on cost or performance as to grow as the need arises. There isn't, if you want to control your initial deployment, you can start with the minimum that you need, and then economically it will go growing as your requirements grow as well. And but yeah, no, that's good.
I mean, that's absolutely true. And that's one of the, I think, when it comes to use cases where, that when you don't need to lock your capital for that long, that's where I think VMware Cloud on AWS shines. So, for example, that DR environment that I was talking about, that's pretty useful, especially for organizations which have, smaller sites, a lot of them, which are small, remote, that kind of thing, or bigger organizations which have a lot of environments to protect. Because DR doesn't happen every day. I mean, thankfully, things are quite reliable. But it's like any other insurance. So you take insurance. If you don't take the insurance, something happens, you always regret why didn't you take it. But then you are also paying for it. So I think it's a very good environment. I mean, that's one of the most economical use cases, I think, that comes to that. And migration also, I mean, a lot of people actually think that migration to this environment will be difficult, but given that HCX is there now, it sort of seamlessly, quite magically converts everything, and you don't have to do very much. That's great. But also you can do some preparation in terms of enabling, say, network insight on your environment. It checks for all the ports and which application is talking to which application, because that's the only other complexity that come into play when you're integrating your services or migrating them. The ones that the use cases I was talking about earlier. On paper, obviously, it seems quite simple, and it is. But the only complexity that comes into play is on the networking side, where you want to determine exactly which ports do you want to open between, say, in the AWS, the ALB environment that I was talking about. So the target group, which ports and security groups you're going to allow access to the other side and vice versa. But once you have that information with you, you can actually put all those details in right from the start. And then it's not a difficult thing to do. So I'm pretty much, very, very enthusiastic about VMware Cloud on AWS myself, and I'd sort of sing the praises all over when I get a chance, as you can possibly tell from my tone.
Yeah. If I may add to the HCX, so the thing with HCX is this is our migration tool within VMware, and when you acquire the service of VNC and AWS, HCX is a service that is included within the suite of services, so you don't have to purchase that as a separate product or anything like that. And also the beauty of it is that to establish this communication in between the on-prem to the VMC and AWS SDDC, there is no need to upgrade your network on-prem. There is no need to upgrade your vSphere as long as you have version 5 or above. You can have any type of storage on-prem. So, because when you establish that interconnectivity at the layer 2, in simple words, you are just extending your local network to VMC and AWS. You can retain the same IP addresses. There is no need to refactor your applications. It's just, and you can move them as a instant live move, or you can plan in advance and say what we call a bulk move or cold migration, and then you can program that and say, okay, I want this to happen over the weekend. You just schedule that, and over the weekend it's going to happen, and you can migrate many hundreds of VMs at the same time. So as long as you install it right from the beginning, like Arthur was saying, with the network interconnectivity, the appliances and that, the migration itself is pretty simple. In fact, there are some demos online that you can look at, or hands-on lab as well, where you can see that as well. But it's very simple to use. Thank you.
That's exactly right. And one thing that I would say is that when we are involved in the migration or helping our customers to migrate as well, I always say to them that you should look at your application or machines in the case that first of all, grouping as to which application is talking to each other constantly, so they can form a group and then can be migrated together. that not only helps with the application not having to talk over weaker links, but also it reduces the chatter in the networking links as well. But at the same time, there are always some machines you can't ever shut down and then say that, you're going to lose a lot of money if you do that. So you can group those together. And then there are some medium ones which are service, but then you don't actually, you can probably allow a reboot or, I don't know, an hour's downtime or something. But then there are others which you can migrate anytime you like. And they are the good ones to start with. To AC compatibility and everything is working fine. So it's a very low risk approach for migrating machines from your on-premises to the VMware Cloud on AWS environment. And once everything seems okay and you're happy with the link speeds and firewall settings and everything like that, then you can start moving the other ones. And the really critical ones, you can hopefully will have the right versions at both ends and can just migrate via vMotion. So yeah, that is, like I said, HCX is a godsend, I guess. And with enough preparation, I think you can do migrations quite easily. Like I said, I mean, get looking into this if you have a chance, if everyone on the webinar. It's not difficult, and we are there to help you as well. So if you have any questions, if you want us to help you doing all of that, we can absolutely do all of these things for you. So just contact me or our sales team, and they can always assist you in doing whichever size of migration you want us to do with you. So if there are no more further questions, then I thank you all for watching the webinar. And the recording, I'm sure, will be present afterwards for you to look at as well. And like I was saying, that if you need to deep dive into any of the more of the topics, you want to have more of that, then just let us know. We'll be quite happy to run another webinar and deeper dive into a particular topic for you. But I guess that's it for us. And see you on the next webinar.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
Cheers.